I'm going to talk a bit about contact training to reduce injury risk and improve performance. So obviously the tackles been in the media quite a bit recently. There was a call to ban the tackle in the UK, and you hear terms like players smashing into each other, players flying into contact, and these were all associated with tackle and rugby contact. But Leeds Beckett, this is the most profound thing you will hear this morning, sorry to the other speakers. Leeds Beckett flew me all the way in from South Africa to tell you this. Rugby contact is a sports skill. So what that means is it can be acquired. That was a joke, sorry, it's a tough crowd out here. It can be acquired, it can be developed, and we can get players to master rugby contact skills. And obviously, like kind of Jason's pointed out, it's rugby contact's complex, so there's a technical aspect to it, a physical aspect, a mental and tactical aspect to it. And the tactical part obviously being defense from the tackling point of view. And I'm just going to touch on some papers that relate to the technical part, the physical part, and the mental part, and then kind of conclude where we need to be going with rugby contact. So obviously there's a risk of injury with the tackle and with making contact. So this slide basically shows the number of events per match on your y-axis, and the size of the bubble indicates your proportion of injuries for that event. So obviously the tackle per 1,000 playing hours is your highest risk of injury, and for per 1,000 events your collision tackle is the highest risk, and tackle comes second. After that, the ruck. And in the brackets, you'll see the number of published studies on each event. So there's 97 tackles, 97 papers on the tackle, 29 on the ruck, and so forth. I'm not going to talk about everything. I'm just going to kind of point out some papers for this presentation, kind of bring my point across or get my argument going. Okay. So we did this. We identified tackle injuries and studied all the injury-free tackles of that same player. And what we found was that there was a difference in tackle technique between the injured, when he got injured, and his injury-free tackles. This is unpublished data that's presenting at this week's IOC. In a similar study, but looking at head collisions in the rugby union. Not concussion, just head collisions. We got a database of about 200 head collisions. And basically in each head collision identified a player at higher risk. So this was the guy who collided his head. The player at lower risk, and then compare that to complete injury-free tackles, or where players completed the tackle. And the main point, there were differences between the groups here, but the main point I want you to take away from this graph is that there was a deficiency in technique both for the lower risk and the higher risk player compared to a completed tackle. So when something goes wrong in a head collision, it's not just the player that collided his head that had bad tackle technique. It's actually also the responsibilities on the opponent also. Just physical conditioning. Jason stole some of my slide. This is related to Gabbett's work. In just terms of physical conditioning and contact, there is some work on, we know some specific things that players need to be physically conditioned. And in this study, Gabbett followed 66 rugby league players over 3 seasons. And basically, he got their physical measurements before the season and divided them into 2. Those that did pull-ups, and this is just an example of pull-up or chin-up, that did a chin-up of 138 kgs, and those that did less than 138 kgs. And these are professional players, so 138 kgs is, it's not your afternoon training session. Anyway, so on the y-axis, you have 100% probability of finishing your match injury-free, and as you go along the season, this probability, obviously, as you get exposed to matches, your probability decreases. And what he found was basically that those that had a chin-up of more than 138 kgs had a higher probability of finishing matches injury-free. And he did this for, as Jason showed, he did this for a number of studies. Decision-making time, probability of being injury-free, if you made quicker decisions, was higher than if you made decisions slower. And again, this was shown for high-intensity running, vertical jump, your 10-meter and 40-meter sprint. And then we also have data on the technical demands of the tackle. We know shoulder injuries are increase your probability of success, arm usage, using the legs when you're driving into contact. And we know technically proficient players tackle more, they execute more dominant tackles and miss fewer tackles, and fatigue also reduces tackle technique. So the point of all of this is that we know enough now about contact demands to kind of start to prepare players better. Does that make sense? There's nothing on mental conditioning just yet in rugby, and that's something we're working on. But in football, a group from in Aaron Klootz shown that mental fatigue basically decreases your technical proficiency in football when doing the Loughborough test, which is 16 passes, and then they got penalised if they got slower. So basically, he showed that mental fatigue affects technical performance, and this is something we're looking into trying to do in rugby contact now. We also know enough in terms of how to design training. I'm sure most of us have seen this graph that when you're setting out a training session, you take into account the person, the task that he needs to execute, and the environment. Trying to get your training sessions more representative and ecologically valid. Kind of the point of that is just trying to mimic the match demands within your training sessions. And then we've all heard of FIT. Let's just hope this goes. Frequency, intensity, and timing of training. So we need to start moving this type of theoretical knowledge on training into kind of coming up with a design for a contact training program. So a lot of this knowledge is not, let me just see how the slide looks on the, yeah, it's fine. A lot of our tackle-related research is not going on to coaches. So we studied, we followed coaches over 96 training sessions and found that, and we gave them a questionnaire asking them about the tackle and so forth. And they said, look, they understand that they know that the tackle is a high risk it's a high risk area. They also know that proper technique is good. It's good to train proper technique to reduce the risk of injury. But when we observed the training sessions, they only did tackle training 15 of the 96 sessions, and of that it was average like 15 minutes of tackle training within that session. So they're obviously not. What they know is not translating into how they're actually doing the tackle, training the tackle. Also, in this questionnaire, we asked them where do they get the knowledge from in terms of training the tackle. The highest ranking resource was their own playing experience. So a lot of what they do in training is based on what they did as players. And then they're obviously watching matches, so it's a lot of informal learning, a lot of stuff that they do on their own. And rated at the bottom was scientific journals and governing bodies such as Boxmart or World Rugby. So this is obviously an issue for us in terms of how we translate our work. And then this just kind of to end off, it's kind of the purpose of this CARR conference and relates a lot to what Ben and Andy spoke about this morning. It's the stuff that as scientists we come up with, and this is our understanding, but in reality that's how the world looks. And here we need to work quite closely with coaches and players in kind of designing this contact training program to move forward. Another thing, just anecdotally speaking to S&Cs and coaches, is that within team settings, there's also a gap between S&Cs. When you're talking about the tackle and you want to condition for the tackle, a lot of coaches are like, no, the technical part is my part and the conditioning part is the S&C's part. And there's no talk between the S&C and the coach in terms of preparing the player for contact technique. So this is where we're on at the moment, and hopefully we want to design a contact training program to prepare players for contact. Cool, thank you.